The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, the birth of a new democracy. Introduction, a fight for liberty. The American Revolution, 1775 to 1783, was a pivotal moment in world history, marking the birth of the United States of America and the establishment of new democratic ideals that would inspire future revolutions and political movements worldwide. What began as a struggle against British colonial rule evolved into a profound redefinition of government, citizenship, and individual rights. The revolutionaries, driven by the desire for self-governance and freedom, rejected monarchy and laid the foundation for a republic built on liberty, equality, and democracy. 1. Causes of the Revolution. Colonial grievances against Britain. By the mid-18th century, the 13 colonies in North America were thriving economically but remained under British rule. Britain imposed a series of taxes and restrictions to recover debts from the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, angering colonists who had no representation in Parliament. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," became a rallying cry for resistance. Key acts that led to rebellion. Sugar Act, 1764. Imposed taxes on sugar and molasses, hurting colonial merchants. Stamp Act, 1765, required stamps, taxes on all printed materials, leading to widespread protests. Townshend Acts, 1767, placed duties on imports like glass, paper, and tea, escalating tensions. Tea Act, 1773, and Boston Tea Party allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly, bypassing colonial merchants. In response, colonists dumped British tea into Boston Harbor in defiance. Intolerable Acts, 1774. Harsh laws intended to punish Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party, further inflaming resistance. Growing colonial unity. First Continental Congress, 1774. Representatives from the colonies met to organize resistance against British policies. Committees of correspondence spread revolutionary ideas, uniting colonists against British oppression. 2. The outbreak of war, 1775 to 1776. The first shots, Lexington and Concord, April 19, 1775. British troops marched to seize colonial weapons in Concord, Massachusetts, but were met by militia forces in Lexington. The first shots of the Revolution were fired, known as the shot heard round the world. The British retreated to Boston, harassed by colonial militias along the way. Second Continental Congress in George Washington's leadership. In May 1775, colonial leaders met again, forming the Continental Army and appointing George Washington as commander. Despite early conflicts, many colonists still hoped for a peaceful resolution with Britain. Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1776. In June 1776, Thomas Jefferson, with input from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, drafted the Declaration of Independence. Adopted on July 4, 1776, it proclaimed that all men are created equal and have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The colonies officially severed ties with Britain, embracing self-governance and democratic principles. 3. Major battles and turning points. Early struggles, 1776 to 1777. The Continental Army suffered early defeats, including the Battle of Long Island. Washington's crossing of the Delaware, December 1776. A surprise attack on Hessian forces at Trenton, New Jersey, revived American morale. The turning point, Battle of Saratoga, 1777. The British plan to cut off New England failed when American forces, led by General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, defeated the British at Saratoga. This victory convinced France to formally ally with the United States, providing military and financial support crucial to the war effort. Foreign assistance and new strategies. France, 1778, Spain, 1779, and the Netherlands, 1780, joined the war against Britain. Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer, trained the Continental Army at Valley Forge, winter 1777-78, transforming them into a disciplined force. Southern campaign and guerrilla warfare. The British shifted focus to the southern colonies, hoping to rally loyalist support. American commanders like Nathaniel Greene and Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, used hit-and-run tactics, weakening British control. 4. Victory and independence, 1781 to 1783. The final battle, Yorktown, 1781. In October 1781, Washington and French General Rochambeau surrounded British General Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia. With French naval support, Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, 1781, effectively ending the war. Treaty of Paris, 1783. Officially signed on September 3, 1783, the treaty. Recognized the United States as an independent nation. Established borders from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. Granted fishing rights off Canada. Britain withdrew troops, and the new American Republic was born. 5. Impact of the American Revolution. Establishing democratic ideals. The Revolution introduced new principles of democracy, self-rule, and individual rights, challenging traditional monarchies. Inspired the U.S. Constitution, 1787, and the Bill of Rights, 1791, ensuring protections for citizens. Global influence. The success of the Revolution inspired other movements, including the French Revolution, 1789, Latin American independence movements, 1800s, social and economic changes. Slavery remained, though debates over abolition began. Women's roles expanded during the war, though they were still denied full rights. The revolution promoted free market ideas and economic independence. A new era of freedom. The American Revolution was more than just a war for independence. It was a revolution of ideas that reshaped the world. By rejecting monarchy and embracing democracy, liberty, and self-rule, the revolutionaries set a precedent for future nations seeking freedom. The legacy of 1776 endures in the modern era, reminding the world that the fight for freedom and democracy is an ongoing struggle. The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, the fall of the monarchy and the rise of liberty. Introduction, a revolution that changed the world. The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, was one of the most significant events in world history, marking the collapse of the French monarchy and the rise of republican ideals based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. It was driven by deep economic hardship, social inequalities, and growing discontent with the monarchy's abuse of power. What began as a push for moderate reform quickly spiraled into radical change, leading to the execution of King Louis XVI, the rise of revolutionary governments, and a period of political upheaval that reshaped France and inspired revolutions across the world. 1. Causes of the French Revolution. Social inequality, the three estates. French society was divided into three rigid social classes, estates. First estate, clergy owned vast lands, paid little taxes, and wielded great influence. Second estate, nobility, wealthy elites who enjoyed privileges while avoiding taxation. Third estate, commoners, 98% of the population, including peasants, artisans, and the emerging bourgeoisie, middle class, who carried the tax burden and faced extreme hardship. Economic crisis and death. Years of warfare, including the American Revolution, drained France's treasury. Lavish spending by King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette further deepened financial troubles. Poor harvests in the 1780s led to widespread famine and food shortages, driving up bread prices and causing riots. Enlightenment ideals. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu challenged monarchy and called for democracy, human rights, and social equality. Their writings inspired revolutionaries to reject absolute rule in favor of representative government. Political crisis and weak leadership. Louis XVI's government was indecisive, failing to implement necessary reforms. In 1789, he called the Estates General France's legislative body for the first time in 175 years, but the Third Estate was ignored, leading to a revolutionary response. 2. The Revolution begins, 1789 to 1791. The Estates General and the formation of a National Assembly, May-June 1789. The Third Estate demanded more representation, but when ignored, they declared themselves the National Assembly on June 17, 1789, claiming the right to govern. On June 20, 1789, they took the tennis court oath, vowing not to disband until a new constitution was written. The storming of the Bastille, July 14, 1789. As tensions rose, Parisian mobs stormed the Bastille, a symbol of royal tyranny, on July 14, 1789. This event marked the start of widespread rebellion, as peasants revolted against feudal lords in the Great Fear of 1789. Abolishing feudalism and the Declaration of the Rights of Man, August 1789. The National Assembly abolished feudal privileges on August 4, 1789, ending centuries of aristocratic dominance. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, August 26, 1789, proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity, guaranteeing rights such as freedom of speech, press, and religion. The March on Versailles, October 1789. Thousands of Parisian women marched to Versailles, demanding bread and forcing Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette to move to Paris, effectively making them prisoners of the revolution. 3. The fall of the monarchy and radicalization, 1791 to 1793. The constitutional monarchy and growing unrest. In 1791, the National Assembly created a constitutional monarchy, limiting the king's power. However, Louis XVI secretly conspired with foreign monarchs to crush the revolution, leading to further distrust. War with Austria and Prussia, April 1792. Fearful that the revolution would spread, Austria and Prussia declared war on France. The revolutionaries feared betrayal, leading to mass arrests of suspected royalists. The end of the monarchy. Execution of Louis XVI, January 21, 1793. On August 10, 1792, revolutionaries stormed the Tuileries Palace, overthrowing the monarchy. The National Convention, new government, declared France a republic on September 22, 1792. Louis XVI was put on trial, convicted of treason, and executed by guillotine on January 21, 1793. 4. The Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794. The rise of the Jacobins and Robespierre. Radical Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre, seized control, believing the revolution was under threat. The Committee of Public Safety took over, enforcing strict laws to eliminate enemies of the revolution. The guillotine and mass executions. The Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794, saw mass executions of suspected counter-revolutionaries. Queen Marie Antoinette was executed in October 1793. Over 16,000 people were guillotined, including moderates like Georges Danton. Fall of Robespierre, July 1794. Robespierre's extreme policies led to growing opposition. On July 27, 1794, he was arrested and executed, ending the Reign of Terror. 5. The rise of Napoleon and the end of the Revolution, 1795 to 1799. The Directory and political instability, 1795 to 1799. After Robespierre's fall, the Directory, a five-man government, took power, but it was weak and corrupt. Economic problems and continued wars made it unpopular, leading to a desire for strong leadership. Napoleon's coup d'état, 1799. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in a coup d'état, ending the French Revolution. He became first consul, eventually declaring himself emperor in 1804, ushering in the Napoleonic era. 6. Legacy of the French Revolution. Global influence. Inspired revolutions worldwide, including the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, the first successful slave revolt. Revolutions in Latin America and Europe in the 19th century. Social and political changes. Abolished feudal privileges, paving the way for modern democracy. Strengthened the ideas of human rights and national sovereignty. Napoleonic impact. Napoleon spread revolutionary ideals across Europe through conquest and reforms like the Napoleonic Code, a revolution that shaped modern democracy. The French Revolution profoundly altered the course of history, dismantling the old feudal order and introducing democratic principles that would shape the modern world. Though it was marked by violence and turmoil, it paved the way for representative government, human rights, and social equality, ensuring its place as one of history's most transformative events. Abolition of the British slave trade. 1807, a major step in ending slavery. Introduction: the fight for freedom. The abolition of the British slave trade in 1807 was a landmark moment in the fight against the transatlantic slave trade and one of the earliest victories in the long battle to end slavery. This momentous legislation, passed by the British Parliament, marked a critical turning point in history. It not only reflected the moral and social transformations of the time, but also sent a powerful message to the world. The enslavement of millions of Africans was no longer acceptable. Today, we're going to explore how the abolition of the British slave trade came to be and the individuals and movements that made it possible. 1. The nature of the slave trade. The British Empire's involvement in the trade. For over 2 centuries, the British Empire had been a central player in the transatlantic slave trade. British ships transported an estimated 3 million enslaved Africans to the Americas, where they were forced to work on sugar, cotton, tobacco, and coffee plantations. The triangular trade involved the exchange of goods like guns, rum, and textiles for enslaved people from Africa, who were then shipped to the Americas, where goods like sugar and tobacco were produced. These goods were then shipped back to Britain. The human cost. Enslaved Africans endured horrific conditions, including brutal physical abuse, inhumane living conditions, and being treated as mere property. Millions died during the brutal voyage across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage. 2. The push for abolition. Growing moral and religious movements. In the late 18th century, a moral awakening began to take shape across Britain. Religious groups, particularly the Quakers, played a major role in advocating for the abolition of the slave trade. They condemned slavery as morally wrong and called for its end. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, spoke out against slavery, urging Christians to recognize the sinfulness of the practice. Key abolitionist figures. William Wilberforce, a member of Parliament, became the leading figure in the abolition movement. He dedicated much of his political career to the cause, pushing for the end of the slave trade. Thomas Clarkson, a key abolitionist, collected evidence of the atrocities of the slave trade, using images, testimonies, and public campaigns to raise awareness. Granville Sharp and Josiah Wedgwood also made significant contributions, with Wedgwood famously producing a medallion depicting a shackled slave and the inscription, "Am I not a man and a brother?" This became a symbol of the abolition movement. The role of abolitionist campaigns. The abolitionist societies formed in Britain, such as the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade, worked tirelessly to influence public opinion. Petitions, public meetings, and pamphlets spread the message across Britain, rallying support for the cause. Abolitionists used the growing power of public sentiment to press Parliament for action. 3. The struggle in Parliament. The debate in Parliament. William Wilberforce introduced a bill to abolish the slave trade in Parliament in 1789, but it was defeated. Over the next 18 years, Wilberforce and other abolitionists persisted, introducing the bill multiple times, despite fierce opposition from those benefiting from the trade. Many wealthy landowners and merchants in Britain supported the slave trade, fearing the economic consequences of abolition. Turning the tide. The movement gathered momentum as more people became aware of the atrocities associated with the slave trade. In 1806, the British Parliament passed a resolution to end the trade, following intense pressure from the public and abolitionists. 4. The passage of the Abolition Act, 1807. The final push. On March 25, 1807, the Slave Trade Act was passed by the British Parliament, officially ending the British transatlantic slave trade. The act made it illegal to engage in the slave trade within the British Empire, although slavery itself was not abolished. It took nearly 30 more years until slavery would be fully abolished in the British Empire with the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. The immediate impact: the passing of the Abolition Act was celebrated as a victory for human rights. It effectively put an end to Britain's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. However, the act did not immediately free enslaved people in the British colonies or address the broader issue of slavery itself. 5. Legacy and global impact. A victory for humanity. The abolition of the British slave trade was a monumental victory for moral justice and human rights, signaling the beginning of the end for the slave trade in the Atlantic world. It demonstrated the power of grassroots movements and political activism in effecting profound change, setting a precedent for future human rights movements. Inspiration for global abolition. The abolition of the British slave trade inspired similar movements in other countries, including the United States and France. The French Revolution had already started challenging slavery in its territories, and the United States would follow with its own abolition efforts, culminating in the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. The ripple effect. In the years following the abolition of the British slave trade, the movement gained global momentum. Nations across the world began to question the morality of slavery, leading to international abolition by the mid-19th century, a step toward freedom and equality. The abolition of the British slave trade in 1807 was a major milestone in the fight for freedom and equality. It marked a turning point in history, symbolizing humanity's rejection of slavery and an important step toward a more just world. Although slavery itself would not be fully eradicated until decades later, the Slave Trade Act of 1807 helped to ignite the broader global movement that ultimately ended the cruel institution of slavery across the globe. This victory, achieved by brave abolitionists and countless activists, forever changed the course of history and paved the way for future generations to continue the fight for freedom, justice, and equality.